Do you struggle with translation? Are you always translating in your head, and because of that, you feel like you can't communicate freely with people? I know this can be extremely frustrating, but translating in your head constantly is actually hurting your fluency. So stick around, because in today's episode, I want to talk to you about how you can start getting rid of this habit of always translating in your head when it's time to speak English to other people. Hey everybody, how's it going? Thiago here, and welcome to another episode. Hope you're doing well. And in case you're new here, I created this podcast and YouTube channel to help intermediate and advanced learners of English communicate with more confidence, more accuracy, more clarity, and more awareness. If this sounds like something you want for yourself and your English, subscribe to the channel and follow the show if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Today, the conversation we're going to have here is all about translating in your head constantly. Before I get started with the topic, though, I want to remind you that my pronunciation course is already available on pre-sale at a very special discounted price. This is a course designed to help you master the main sounds of the English language when it comes to making them, and also the main connected speech patterns that native speakers use in real media and real life. So if you want to take your listening skills and pronunciation and speaking skills to the next level, consider buying the course. It's already on pre-sale. Link in the description for you to learn more about it, or in the show notes. Check it out. You're going to love it. All right, guys. So this is a very important topic because I know it's a real pain point that many of you out there have, and many of my students have already voiced this frustration. The fact that they always translate in their heads when they have to speak English. So I divided this episode into three main parts. First of all, we're going to talk about why translating constantly is bad, is damaging to your fluency. And then part two, I'm going to give you some tips on how you can start finally getting rid of this habit of translating constantly. And lastly, I'm going to talk about when I believe personally that translation could be useful. All right. I'm going to give you some examples of situations where actually translating could be beneficial. All right. So without further ado, let's get started here. First of all, why translating constantly in your head is bad for your fluency. Let me give you some reasons. First of all, it slows your speech down more than necessary, because it's almost like you are adding another and unnecessary step to your communication. Usually, fluent speakers of a language, they follow two basic steps when they communicate. They think about something and they speak. When you translate, you are adding an extra step to this process. First, you think about something in your native language, then you translate that something into English, and then you speak. You see, so it adds an unnecessary extra step. And because of that, naturally, you will communicate much slower than you needed to. All right? So it's going to take much more time for you to finally utter a complete sentence or a complete idea or argument. Another reason why translating is bad for your fluency, because it prevents you from actually feeling truly fluent. You never feel truly fluent when you are constantly translating in your head. Why? Because translating adds extra tension to the whole communication process. It's that effort, it's that struggle, And remember, fluency is all about flow, naturalness, effortless and easy communication. As a matter of fact, I made a video here on the podcast. I made an episode talking about fluency and proficiency. In this episode, I actually define what fluency is. Remember, those of you who have listened to that episode, it's all about smoothness, naturalness, flow. So if you're always translating, that doesn't add fluidity to your speaking. It adds more tension, more struggle. And you don't want that, right? Nobody wants that. Everybody wants to communicate freely. A little side note here. This is actually kind of ironic because think about it. One of the reasons why we translate so much, I mean people in general, right, is because they don't want to get confused, right? So maybe you'll see a word or you see a phrase in English, and you don't want to be confused by that phrase. So your natural reaction, your instinct is to translate that sentence to your native language to really understand what it says there, because you don't want to get confused. But the irony here is that when you actually translate every single word all the time, you are getting more confused than you would have been if you hadn't translated in the first place. Because English is full of idioms, idiomatic expressions. It's full of phrasal verbs, words and expressions that are not so obvious if you translate them literally. If you translate them literally, it's just going to get you or make you even more confused. You see the irony here? Another reason why translating in your head is bad for your fluency is because it creates a mental roadblock. All right? Just like I just said, you never feel truly fluent or you never feel truly free when communicating. And remember that when it comes to speaking English with people in real life, in real situations, at work, when you travel, with your friends, most real life communication happens in the moment. It happens in the moment. It's usually unscripted. Conversations in real life are usually unscripted. Many things could happen, all right, during a real life conversation. People usually go on tangents. When you go on a tangent during a conversation, you deviate from the main topic of the conversation for a little bit. You talk about something else, and then hopefully you come back to the main topic. Some people never come back to the main topic, so that happens. People go on tangents, make side comments or funny remarks. Yeah. So you got to practice being in the moment, being more in the moment, because you're not going to have time in a real life conversation. When you travel, when you work in English, you're not going to have time to translate everything in your head before writing something or before saying something in English. So start developing that in the moment feel, that in the moment attitude when it comes to communication now. This is really, really important. I just said that translating slows down your speech considerably. It also slows down your listening comprehension. Your listening comprehension doesn't get fully developed. Actually, it never develops because you are always translating. And like I said, communication in real life is usually in the moment. Many things happen and usually at a faster pace. So your listening comprehension is going to suffer tremendously if you don't practice being there in the moment. All right? When you translate, you're not in the moment. You are in your head. That's what happens when you translate. When you translate constantly, you are always in your head. You're not really observing what's happening in the situation, how people are feeling, what they're actually saying to you. You are in your head, constantly worrying about translating everything. So translating constantly slows down your speech considerably, so you speak way too slow, and it also hurts your listening skills. It's much harder for you to understand people talking in real life and also natives in media, like movies, TV series, and podcasts. All right? And overall, I would say that this habit of always translating in your head makes your journey to fluency much, much longer. Okay? Let me bring an analogy here. Picture this. Picture yourself having to run a marathon. Okay? Imagine you have to run a marathon. All right? But there's something you have to wear in that marathon. You have to wear a backpack full of heavy rocks. All right? Can you picture that? You running a marathon with a backpack full of rocks. You might get to the end of the marathon, of the race, but it's going to take you way more time and way more effort to get there. And that's exactly what this habit of always translating in your head does to your overall English development and English fluency. Maybe what you could achieve in 2-3 years might take you 10, 15, or even more years. If you get there, you might give up before, 10, 15 years past. This is really common among people who, quote unquote, study English for years and still can't communicate fluently. I'm sure you know somebody like this, or even maybe you yourself have already said this. Oh, I've been studying English for so long. I've been studying English since I was a kid, since I was a teenager. It's been 10 years, 15 years. But I never feel fluent. I don't feel fluent. Yeah? There are a couple of problems here. Yeah? One possible problem for this, or reason, is that people usually have a on and off relationship with English studies, so they never really commit to learning the language consistently. So they might start something, take a course here, and then quit, and then 6 months later they come back, and then they do one more year, and then they stop. This on and off relationship that you may have with your English learning is really bad. This is one reason why this happens, but also another reason is because you haven't really gotten rid of this habit of translating in your head. Years have passed since you started learning English, and you are still translating in your head. So you got to become conscious of that. And you have to be deliberate and conscious when it comes to, okay, I have to stop translating. I won't translate. Because many times, guys, translating can be or can act like a crutch. A crutch is an object that you use when you break your leg, for example. It helps you walk, when you don't have both legs working well. So translating can be a crutch for some learners. But you have to resist the temptation, resist the urge to translate. If you listen to something in English, just absorb it, just embrace it. Resist the urge. Resist the temptation to translate. All right? So, I've already started giving you some tips here, so let's move on to part 2 of this conversation today. We just talked about why translating is bad for you. Now, let's talk about how to stop translating in your head so much. First of all, guys, the first tip I have to give you here is immersion. Surround yourself with English. Listen to music, listen to podcasts, watch movies, watch TV series, read books in English, read articles in English. Immerse yourself in the language. I've already talked about this many times here on the podcast. Nowadays, it's really easy, actually, for you to create your own immersion in English from your home country, not having to travel to an English-speaking country to have that immersion. So start there. If you don't have this habit of watching things in English, listening to things in English every day, it's going to be really hard for you to get rid of this habit of translating. Okay? And I mean every day, guys. English should not be something you study only. It should be part of your life. You have to make English part of your life. So English should be present in your daily life. Everywhere. Think about this, okay? Another tip, practice speaking any chance you get. So you can talk to native speakers or talk to other learners. You can join language exchange programs or groups. You can take online classes. You can find a language partner or a language friend who is also learning English to communicate with, to talk with. Why? Because you have to do more of what you fear or do more of what you feel uncomfortable with. Usually people who translate all the time in their heads don't feel very comfortable with speaking. Okay? So, for you to become better at that, you have to do more of what you feel afraid of, or of what you feel discomfort with. This actually reminds me of that movie, Batman Begins. Have you seen that movie? Batman Begins is Christian Bale playing Batman and Bruce Wayne. And there is this part where he is becoming the Batman. He's getting ready to finally become the Batman. And then he decides that as a symbol, he's going to dress like a bat. Bats will be his symbol. And then Alfred asks him, Master Wayne, why bats? And then Bruce Wayne says, bats frighten me. In other words, bats make me afraid, scared. It's time for my enemies to share my dread, or to share my fear. Dread is fear here, okay? So he was terrified of bats. And because of that, he actually chose to become a bat as the symbol, the superhero, yeah? So he became the Batman, yeah? So this is about embracing discomfort, embracing your fears, getting out of your comfort zone. And when you start deliberately thinking in English more often, and you deliberately refuse to translate in your head, it might feel uncomfortable at first. It might feel terrifying at first. But you got to embrace that. Do more of that, okay? Force yourself to think in English more and more and more, and not resort to translation. With time, it will get easier. And then it'll come a point where you don't even feel the need anymore to translate all the time, okay? Another tip here, learn in context. Learn vocabulary in context. So learn new words and phrases in sentences and real-life situations. Always contextualize the vocabulary you come across, and the grammar too, all right? So focus on chunks of language, groups of language, not individual words, okay? Because like I said earlier, the English language is full of expressions, idiomatic expressions that sometimes are full phrases that carry one meaning, or phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs usually have 2 or 3 words, a verb and a preposition, but they have their distinct meanings. So learn language, learn vocabulary in context and in chunks, in groups, not individual words. That's why when I teach vocabulary here on the channel, for example, I always make sure I give example sentences with those words, so you can see those words being used in a potential scenario those words could be used in, all right? It's not enough to just give you the word, give you the definition, and that's it. I gotta give you examples as well, because conversation and communication happens in sentences, not individual words, okay? This is a good one, guys. I had this let's say, epiphany, this revelation when I was thinking about this topic, right? Be okay with speaking like a child. Another way for you to get rid of translation, be okay with, quote unquote, speaking like a child. What do I mean? I mean that it's better to speak simple phrases without translating, but speaking them fluently and effectively, then maybe trying to speak at a higher level when you don't have enough proficiency yet. I always give this example. I think of successful professionals in their field. Maybe you know somebody who is a very successful lawyer or engineer or doctor. In their first language, that person communicates extremely well. And then what happens usually is that person, when studying English, tries or wants to communicate at the same high level as he or she does in their native language, but they realize that they can't, because they don't have the tools yet. They need more baggage in the English language to be able to do that. So what do? They resort to translation. Oh, what is that word again in my language? Okay, how can I say that in English? So they feel stuck, they block because of that. That's why they resort to translation, because they want to communicate at a higher level than they can. Okay? So my tip here is be okay with speaking like a child. Be okay with maybe communicating in English, not in a as sophisticated way as you would in your native language. But trust the process, because if you keep learning and developing, it will come a time when you will start communicating in English with more sophistication, just like you communicate in your first language. But it takes time, okay? And another tip here related to that, speaking like a child, is get rid of their security blanket. Usually a small child has a security blanket. It's that blanket that the child always carries around, the child sleeps with, because of the smell, because of the texture. It gives the child that sense of comfort, that sense of security, right? But that child can't have that security blanket forever. As the child grows and matures, the natural thing to happen is for that child to eventually get rid of that security blanket. Now the child doesn't need that anymore. The same thing happens with translation, okay? For many learners, translating is like a security blanket. It gives you that security, that extra layer of protection, yeah? But it's also preventing you from growing and developing as a competent English speaker. So you have to get rid of that security blanket, throw it away. In this case, throw translation away, translate on a regular basis, throw it away and start just embracing the language as it comes. I guess that point of learning a language like a child would, in that sense, it makes sense, from that angle, because a child usually just absorbs language as it comes. The child has no agenda, no pre-filters. The child just consumes language as it comes. Embrace it as it comes. So start doing the same with your English. Just embrace English as it comes. If you can't understand everything you hear, it's okay. Just embrace it. Try to understand as much as you can. And if you don't understand everything, you can always study what you didn't understand later, or you can just let go, and with time, both deliberately and in an organic way, you will develop more and more. But get rid of that security blanket, okay? It can be painful. Yes, guys, it can be painful. I know it can be uncomfortable. It can be painful. And we as humans, we tend to avoid pain, right? We always want to avoid pain. We don't want to feel pain. We don't want to feel discomfort. We don't want to feel, insecure or uncomfortable. But that's how growth happens, okay? Think about it. Do you prefer to avoid some pain now by always translating? But on the other hand, you always feel like you will never be fluent? Or would you prefer to embrace the pain now of getting rid of translation and suffering a little bit now, but in the long run, that's going to do wonders for your English fluency? And I want to close this point with this thought. The best things in life are usually outside of your comfort zone. Think about that, okay? The best things in life are usually outside of your comfort zone, okay? Do you want to get that international job at that global company? Well, maybe you're going to have to go through some English interviews, go through a lengthy process to be selected, and you risk being rejected in the end. This is not comfortable, is it? But that might be what you have to do to get that job you want. Okay? Bringing that to English, do you want to be that confident, natural English speaker? You want to be that fluent, sophisticated communicator in English? Okay. One of the things you're going to have to do is get rid of translation. It's going to be uncomfortable, but you got to do it. Think about that. Okay? Now, let me close this episode, guys, by talking about when translation can actually be helpful. Because, of course, it's not all bad. Is translating all bad? Of course not. Things are usually not so black and white. There are always nuances to any discussion, right? So let me give you here now, to close this episode today, some situations when I actually find that translation or translating can be helpful in your journey. First of all, translation can be helpful for beginners. Okay, if you are at A1 level, okay, if you are really a beginner, using translation from time to time can actually help you because it helps you make sense of this new language that you don't have much experience with yet, okay? But then the idea is that as you keep learning and studying English, you gradually reduce this reliance, this need for translation. And the idea is that the more English you consume and the more English you are exposed to, the more you start building a natural radar inside of you for the English language. It's almost like you develop some sort of intuition as well, the more English content you consume. And that intuition usually guides you very well in your journey. Yeah. And then you don't have to translate all the time. But for beginners, people who are just starting out, translating can be useful. Translating can also be useful when dealing with very complex words. I'm talking about very complex words, words that usually have one very specific meaning. Like, when you are preparing for C2, for example. If you want to learn a very specific C2 word, like a super advanced technical word, it might be useful for you to actually learn the translation of that word to your native language, because it's a very specific meaning that you're dealing with here, okay? Kind of related to that, translating can also be useful, in my opinion, for specific terminology or specific jargon in your professional field or area, okay? So again, if you are a lawyer, there's a lot of legalese, we call it, a lot of legal jargon that you have to learn in your native language. It could be useful for you to actually learn the exact equivalent of that jargon, of those words in English, so you can communicate with precision, all right? The same thing happens if you are a doctor, an engineer, or if you work with anything that requires you to learn specific words, specific terminology that only you and your fellow professionals, know. In that case, using translation can be beneficial. And also for specific words like conjunctions. For example, I could try to explain to you that we use the conjunction or the linking word however when we want to contrast two different ideas in the same paragraph or in the same argument, right? But if I'm talking to a Brazilian, for example, many times it's just easier for me to give the person the exact translation for however, because the person then knows, okay, I know how to use that word in my native language. Now I know how to use it in English. I know the meaning that it actually carries, So for specific words like conjunctions, let's say, however, nevertheless, nonetheless, due to, owing to, it could be useful for you to know the exact translation to those words. But you see, that's it. Aside from these situations here, I would say most of the time, guys, translating is bad for your English fluency. And if you have this habit of always translating in your head, this is actually hurting your fluency and development in English. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope this episode made you reflect some more on your relationship with translation and how that relationship is affecting your English learning, okay? And I also hope that you leave this episode with some tips and some pieces of insight for you to carry in your journey from now on. All right? Guys, don't forget to check out my pronunciation course available on pre-sale at a very special discounted price. Link in the description for you to learn more about the course, also as a pinned comment on YouTube here. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, the link to learn more about the course is in the show notes, all right? And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're not a subscriber yet, and share this channel with people you know who don't know this channel yet and who are interested in taking their English skills to the next level. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, also don't forget to leave me a 5-star review there because that helps me a lot on those platforms as well. Guys, thank you so much. I'm Thiago. I'm signing off, and I'll be talking to you very soon. Bye-bye.